Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's Better Managers broadcast. I'm Anne Franca, the Chief Executive of CMI, and each Friday at this time, we bring you news and views on management topics that matter. Now, today, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by two CMI companions, both charity CEOs, Dalton Leong, the Chief Executive of the Children's Trust, and Thomas Lawson, the Chief Executive of Turn to Us. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Now, you're both, of course, charity CEOs, as I said, and we know the pandemic has been particularly tough for charities. And moreover, you both operate in areas, financial hardship in Turn to Us, and vulnerable children in the Children's Trust, where COVID has hit particularly hard. What have been the major challenges that you faced, and how have you coped? And maybe I'll start with Dalton.
Certainly, thank you, Anne. I run a charity where we support children with brain injury. So all of the children are clinically extremely vulnerable. So number one, absolutely, in terms of challenge has been making sure we safeguard those children and ensure that we have a COVID-free site. Glad to say we've managed to achieve that in the last 15 months. So that's been number one priority. Of course, financial uncertainty for the sector, certainly for us at the Children's Trust, but just the sector generally, has been a huge challenge for us. We have this mix of statutory funding and voluntary funding, 2/3, 1/3 of about a 30 million turnover. But if you consider that in the UK, there's something like 165,000 charities or so, with a total turnover of £48 billion. And recent surveys have suggested that 60% of those charities say that COVID-related safety measures have increased their operating costs. That's no different for us. We've spent £160,000 just on PPE and COVID tests in the last year. Huge amounts of money. Reports also suggest that 8 out of 10 charities believe that the coronavirus pandemic will negatively impact their ability to deliver on planned objectives over the next 12 months or so. Now, thankfully, we at the Children's Trust, we're in the 20% of charities which is actually on track to deliver our strategic objectives for a strategy we launched just before COVID arrived on our shores. But huge challenges for the sector, as you can imagine. And of course, while income drops, along with more than half of those charities I mentioned that are surveyed, we expect as a sector for our demand for the services to grow. We certainly can see that already. And yet we're doing that against the backcloth of understanding that something like 10% of charities may be forced to close within the next year or so. So potentially quite bleak times ahead for our sector. And then the other big challenge for us is people, keeping the workforce motivated. We had to transform and adapt our working style overnight, putting 60% of staff working on a 24/7 site and 40% of staff working from home overnight. So addressing the need to recognise that challenge and focus on ultimately what binds us together was really important, which ultimately is the children and families, strong internal communications, and just ensuring that we share experiences across the organisation. That work-life balance is really difficult to manage, of course. Working from home or living at work, as I call it, can create those tensions with burnout, long hours, and the emotional impact of living through a pandemic. So supporting our staff through the emotional well-being and resilience of the staff and the volunteers has been really crucial. Mental health.
That was some huge challenges that you've outlined for the sector and also for you. And Thomas, what about your challenges helping the financially vulnerable?
Thanks, Anne. Very similar challenges, actually, but let me talk mostly about the challenges facing the people for whom Turn to Us exists, those who are experiencing financial shocks and financial hardship. Just to give people a sense, we Turn to Us makes grants directly to families facing financial shocks, and then in the last 12 months we made £4 million worth of grants to nearly 6,000 families. And we've got a very, very successful benefits calculator on our website and embedded in other organisations' websites. And last year that helped release £1.2 billion worth of benefit claims that would not otherwise have been made. And that's about 225,000 people a year. And it's about 610 people and families a day. And also we've helped about 81,000 people on the helpline. The challenges facing Turn to Us have mostly been around the huge volume of demand, a huge increase, and also the shape of that demand as well. So just to give you a sense, more than 1 in 5 of us now are running out of money always or most of the time. That's 11 million people, and that's an additional 4.2 million in the last year. So a very huge increase. And then the shape of that financial challenge is a third of disabled people have run out of money compared to 18% of people without a disability. 24% of women run out of money compared to 13% of men. And Black, Asian and other minorities communities are much more likely to be infected, much more likely to die, because as we've seen during lockdown, they're more excluded from the primary economy. Those jobs where you have a reliable income, you can rely on holiday pay, sick pay, they're much more likely to be in the secondary economy. They're more likely to live in crowded conditions. And those of us from minorities communities are much more likely to have seen our income negatively affected. So furlough is a drop of 1/5 of income, right? And something like 50% of white families have seen an income impact. 88% of Bangladeshi families have seen an income impact. So you can really see the structural and systemic nature of sexism, disablism, racism having an impact. And all of this is in the context of many of us saving an additional excess £140 billion worth of savings in our bank accounts. So you can see a huge divergence of the economic impact.
Wow, that is some very startling statistics there. Now, let me ask you, will you do anything differently in terms of how you've adapted your activities that you're going to keep doing differently post-COVID? Dalton, anything you're going to do differently?
Well, I remember saying at the start of the pandemic, the key to success and our long-term sustainability is about being adaptable, agile, innovative, and we will come out of this better and stronger. And I was very clear about that with our staff. And we've had to move very early into what we were already planning to do, which is around digital transformation, moving face-to-face services online where possible, with our brain injury community service, looking at needs assessments for children pre their placement with us, and some of the therapies online, unheard of pre-COVID. So we've had to bring our digital transformation program forward hugely. And the pandemic's actually helped drive our strategy to diversify services in this way by just looking at more flexible ways to deliver our work to the children and families we support, increase the range of what we can actually provide. And it has meant a number of new innovations on how we deliver our services along the way, such as the needs assessments I just mentioned, but robotics we've introduced. And I see innovation and creativity being key to our current and future success. And then the other point really is around hybrid working. It is absolutely here to stay. We need to understand the challenges of avoiding 2 different ways of working, because 60% of our staff run the 24/7 service. It's 40% of staff work from home, fundraisers and support staff. So how do we avoid an us and them culture developing in those circumstances? And we just have to find an answer.
Great. Well, those are 2 great innovations. What about you, Thomas? Anything you're going to keep doing post-COVID?
Well, in some ways, because a large part of Turn to Us has already been digital first, we were well placed when the lockdown came. So our benefits calculator, our grant search tool, the 8 million people who visit our website every year. So we were well placed for that. But our individual grant making, actually, that's not so digital. So we've been having to apply that agile approach, that product development way to more of our work. So I think there's that. I mean, and what we saw about already being a digital charity is that at the beginning of the lockdown, we would normally see something like 5,000 benefit calculations a day, and that went up to 50,000 a day.
Wow.
And so we had to buy another £60,000 worth of service space to manage the traffic, but we were kind of largely already well equipped. I think there's two very different things that we've had to really kind of expedite. One is to really, because we've seen that veil of respectability ripped away in the UK around the impact on minoritized communities, women, disabled people, that actually we've had to be much stronger within the organization about understanding about the extent to which we are, or indeed are not in many circumstances, inclusive as an organization. So if we are going to genuinely deliver the best solutions for Black and Asian people, for example, then we've got to be brilliant at that within the organization. Mm-hmm. So how do we get the best insights for that? Sort of much better work around that. Secondly, we've got to be much stronger at partnership working. And I think not only within the social sector, which of course has to happen, but beyond that. So I think if we think about society as a three-legged stool with the statutory, the commercial and the social sectors holding up society, then we've got to collaborate across all three legs of that stool. And we need to, all of us, stop imagining that the commercial sector is more professional or the statutory sector is more process. We've got to find the best of each sector and collaborate. And finally, in order to design the very best services for the people for whom we exist, people who have got lived experience or indeed lived expertise of financial hardship have to be co-designing, co-delivering, co-evaluating and co-improving all of our services all the time. Any point at which our organization is making a significant decision, lived expertise as well as research data has to be present in the room, and that is a critical element of success for the future, and it's critical building back better.
Yeah, so that leads straight into my next question, and I'm going to come to you first, Tom, because you started to answer it, which is about what has government done to help, or what would you like to see them do differently, as well as businesses to help, with this three-legged stool as you described it in the future.
Thanks for that question. I'm going to start off being critical of government. So if we think about the essential role of the social sector in society, so we've seen this, the commitment to volunteering. Charities have been central to the response. For example, Cancer Research UK moved its work to trying to determine how to deliver vaccines in partnership with biotechs. The Royal Voluntary Service has been central to coordinating some of the 400,000 volunteers doing the vaccinations. St John's Ambulance alone has trained 30,000 of its volunteers to be doing that vaccination. And we have seen community group after community group supporting people who have not been caught by the safety net of the furloughing or self-employment. So we know how central the social sector is. The income for the last year has dropped by £4 billion, and we saw £750,000 from the government. £750 million from the government. So a fraction of what the charity sector has lost, and we have seen thousands of people made redundant. So there is a lot more to be done. International development, which I know is currently a news topic today, has also been a bit abandoned, and that I also think is a mistake. There are already 10 billion vaccines available in the world. And if we do not vaccinate, there will be huge numbers of emergent variants emerging that will be resistant to the vaccines. And then we're back to square one. So we've got to think about this globally, and we've got to think about this as a sector. However, local government, companies and individuals have really stepped in, and we've seen some pioneering philanthropy and innovation, particularly at local government, mayoral levels and devolved government. Excuse me, I've got a cough. Sorry. My apologies. I think it's talking about COVID has made me triggered. So there's been some really impressive collaborations, and it's been amazing to see companies and individual philanthropists really step in and we saw our income step up. And we've seen really impressive collaborations, including with Royal London, which is an insurance company. So there is a lot more we can do, and particularly for employers, whether they're statutory, social sector, or commercial, we need to make employment work. 60% of people claiming universal credit are in work. The truth that work gets you out of poverty is no longer a truth. And so we need to be making sure that when we're creating employment contracts, people are falling on the right side of the economy, not on self-employment contracts and zero-hour contracts that do not protect people from financial hardship.
Right. Well, there's a big list there, big to-do list. Dalton, what's your to-do list for government and employers?
Well, taking the same baton from Tom, you mentioned the 4 billion there shortfall. Actually, forecasted for a 10 billion pound funding gap in our sector. Many charities have had nigh on 20% drop in their income, yet no reserves to fall back on, and that's the scale of the issue we face. So I agree with Tom. The charities unfortunately are woefully forgotten by the government at the moment. We need to ensure that small charities in particular can help people and communities be sustainable, and that's national and local government responsibility alongside the independent funders. We just need to find a way for them to commit to providing the funding for core costs using grants and not just contracts. There is a call currently for the government to provide more financial support for charities. So let's see that happening. Like to see the government also do more to help the public understand the vital role that charities play within our key infrastructure programs around health and education. These are not currently funded by our taxes. Government could do far more to encourage a notion that supporting charities is just part of our collective civic responsibility. I've long believed that charities will play a vital role in societal recovery post the pandemic, and yet we rely on the giving public who have stepped up their support during the COVID crisis. So we just need this government to help spread that load with new ideas. For example, 1990 gift aid was a great innovation, but that was a long time ago. So what is next?
Right. Yeah, no, I think it's a great point. And some of the stats Thomas was sharing with us about the role that charities have played in helping with COVID, combating it, is people don't understand that. And you're absolutely right. Government should make that better known. Well, of course, you've both touched on this, and Thomas, you in particular, inequality's grown during the pandemic. You mentioned in your stats the impact on women, ethnic minorities, and the disabled. What do we need to do to ensure we don't end up with an even larger inequality gap coming out of COVID? What do you think, Thomas?
At the risk of repeating myself, I think if any of us are in positions of influence or authority or power within our organizations, then we individually need to take a leadership role in making our organizations inclusive. And I know it's hard work. But it is also ultimately incredibly rewarding. You will learn more about yourself, and you will, we know from all the business schools that businesses that are more diverse and genuinely inclusive make better decisions, are more competitive, deliver better impact. So there is, of course, a business reason to do it, but there's also a profound moral reason to doing it, particularly as we build back better from the recovery from the lockdown. So it's really critical that we as leaders and managers, I think that will include training and setting targets in our organizations. Of course, we talk about gender pay gap. Why are we not also committing to race pay gap and so on? So I think there's a lot we can do within our organizations. I think as a country, I talked about kind of co-design, co-delivery. Government at every level should also be doing that. Do not underestimate that simply because someone is presenting with a challenge or a difficulty, that they do not have brilliant insights, agency, resourcefulness, intelligence, energy, and hunger to improve things. So use everyone's insights and abilities to build back better. And I think that actually Whitehall and to give the Treasury its credit, the furlough scheme and the job support schemes for self-employed people have been largely very good. Of course, they could not catch everyone, but otherwise, government has been peculiarly tin-eared to the social sector. And I think that there is a real opportunity for local government, for companies, and for social sector organisations like charities and social enterprises to lead the way and to demonstrate to Whitehall about the things that can be done, like Turn to Us in Royal London.
Yeah, and Dalton, what would you do? What do you think we need to do to make sure we don't end up with even greater inequality?
Yeah, as Tom says, leadership is so crucial in this, but leadership is at all levels of the organisation. So as you'll know, Anne, I'm on the Race Advisory Committee for the Chartered Management Institute, so pushing on this work stream. We've also appointed an Equity, Diversity and Inclusion Officer at the Children's Trust full-time to help push some of the work that we need to be doing on this, because we recognise where we've fallen short. But for me, the key is embedding this into every strategic plan that we have, so leadership development, culture and values, responsible organisation. We've got all these work programmes going on, but it needs to become part of the fabric and the culture of the organisation, not just an add-on. And recognising, as I said, about leadership, it's about a bottom-up and a top-down approach. So how do we enthuse our workforce through working groups, networks, etc.? And then the point that Tom was talking about, targets, data and analysis, absolutely crucial, so that you can ensure you know your baseline position and you can measure the success. The Charity Commission, by the way, in the UK, lead really strongly on board inclusivity. I think that's lacking at the moment.
Yeah, those are all great suggestions. And taking personal responsibility, I want to conclude before we have take questions. And if you have a question, please put it in the chat and we'll get to as many as we can. What have you personally learned about your own leadership in this crisis? And what's your one biggest piece of advice for our listeners? Let me go to you first, Dalton.
Resilience, managing your own well-being through support networks, processes that work for me, and just maintaining my energy levels and a sort of can-do positivity. Is the glass always half full? Yes, it is. I talked about adaptability and agility earlier on. How are we, creative and innovative and bringing new ideas and just bringing that to the fore, as it were. The need to balance that short-term tactical fixes against long-term planning, ensuring we have focused agendas and clarity on our strategic objectives. And key for me has been actually the need to involve children in all areas of our work, as Tom was alluding to earlier. Just involving them in the development and the implementation of our strategies definitely made it stronger. And using personal professional contacts to get information about what measures we could introduce to stay ahead of the curve, secure PPE. We were one of the first organisations in our county to get all of our staff and children vaccinated. That was just a fantastic feeling. Leadership visibility, absolutely key. It's so much harder during the pandemic in our virtual world, of course. Face-to-face contacts preferable, but substituting incessant Zoom calls for phone calls and social media to stay in touch with people is incredibly powerful. And if the last year was about anything, it was about the importance of strong leadership, motivating, keeping focused, caring, constant horizon scanning, forecasting, reforecasting, taking decisions quickly, and staying resilient. And I firmly believe today the Children's Trust is in a better and stronger position than it was pre-COVID.
Well, that's great. So, Tom, what's your lesson learned and piece of advice?
Yeah, it's hard to follow that. I think that they're all exceptional pieces. More than pieces of advice. They're kind of really brilliant principles. I think just to describe the challenge, I think so many of our organisations, and I'm sure that this is true for many of the people watching this too. We've achieved an exceptional amount. We've all of us been innovative. We've all of us found ways to deliver our work differently and to work together differently. And there's a lot to be very proud of in that, and to be very hopeful. And I think that's very true. But burnout is very real. A change is as good as a rest, and we've not had any of either, right? Not had change nor rest. And I think working from home, it is so difficult not to do 11-hour days, because the huge volume of demand, particularly on chief executives, has grown in complexity. So, and I think that there's one thing I've learned is the dramatically increased volume of emotional support that managers are having to give to people. That you would not, before the lockdown, you would have thought would be the responsible for mental health professionals. So and so many of my one-to-one meetings are people struggling with parenting and homeschooling and their job. It's not feasible. So people are very, very frustrated. And so I think also being an emotional receptacle for people's frustration is a massive challenge. So very real, I think, challenges. And the importance of paying good attention to those in our teams who face more social and economic barriers as well. So all of that complexity, I think, is very new. And I've been exhausted, if I'm entirely honest. And I think that there's this kind of complexity in leadership where, on the one hand, it's important to be kind of full of hope and confidence and to build people, as well as to be very human and vulnerable. Right at the beginning of lockdown, my mum died very suddenly. Oh. And my whole family had to kind of run around and doing everything. And to be able to kind of continue to lead an organization whilst this very difficult thing was happening, and that complexity of being vulnerable and confident at the same time those demands, I think, on leaders are really extreme. But I would kind of concur with everything that Dalton said: health, rest, exercise, watching the hours, investing in hope, investing in networks, even if it feels a bit awkward, investing in kind of internal networks and trying to find new ways to casually have conversations that can feel a bit forced. Valuing tech now as part of human and social development. Invest in training for your team. Just because we've kind of been locked down does not mean training cannot happen, particularly management training, which will be pleased me to say, because managing in this new environment is different. So really investing in that, and managing and investing in conflict management training as well. Mm-hmm. Yes.
So lots of learnings from both of you. Just absolutely fascinating discussion. I want to have time for some questions. And our first is from Dawn. How has donor behavior changed during the pandemic in your organizations? And what do your future funding channels look like? Great question. Dalton?
Yeah, we've been really pleasantly surprised at how loyal our supporters have been to us. So when we launched a coronavirus emergency appeal, we raised the best part of £750,000, largely through our existing supporter network. So that's been fantastic. So that says a lot to me about how we've managed to create lasting, lifetime relationships with our donors. Absolutely crucial. I think face-to-face, door-to-door, face-to-face fundraising, that feels like it's, yesterday's child, as it were. We've moved way away from that, and we're just looking at now trying to focus on digital means for fundraising, with some success, virtual events, because clearly we can't run marathons in the streets anymore.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, Tom, how has it changed funding behavior in your organization?
We were very lucky. We kind of reached out to the Daily Telegraph just as the lockdown happened to say, look, this isn't the time of year you'd normally look for charity partner, but why don't you choose us? And that was a deft move, and they did, and they were an incredible partner. And we raised £1.3 million through the Telegraph, as well as then on top of that, another kind of £1.5 million of other donors who had seen the Telegraph and wanted to make institutional donations. So I think that what that demonstrates actually is that organizations like Turn to Us, like Trussell Trust, who's running the food banks, like Dalton's organizations, there are some charities that have been able, because the work we're doing now is particularly pertinent to the lockdown and to the pandemic, and some of those charities have done well. And so again, a bit like some people are doing well in saving £140 billion worth of savings, and some people have got huge amounts of debt. That's also true for charities. Mm-hmm. Charities like ours have done well. I mean, that money hasn't stuck to the insides of the organization. We've just been channeling it straight through into people's bank accounts, right? But other organizations have really struggled. Government, after 20 years of funding, has kind of stopped. So right. Charities are really struggling.
Well, you've both innovated, it seems like, and implemented innovative partnerships. But I've got another question here from Yankee. As you've mentioned, many charitable organizations have had to take difficult decisions to reduce employee headcount throughout the pandemic. What initiatives have you implemented within your organizations to ensure employees feel valued and remain motivated? Dalton, you touched on that earlier. What did you do?
Yeah, well, thankfully we haven't made too many redundancies. Sadly, we had to make 4 in fundraising, but that's it on a workforce of 650 staff. We're very, very, very pleased with that. I think, well, for a start, we've given everyone an additional day's holiday, annual leave this year, to be taken as a thank you for everything that they pulled out of the bag, as it were, last year. And then we've been trying to, so for example, we had it's Volunteers Week this week. We went round to all of our shops delivering gift bags. I went to our local shop, and that's gone down extremely well. We made sure that in lieu of a Christmas dinner that we would normally fund for all staff, we gave each department a sum of money to do localised gifts and so on. So just ways of trying to make sure. We've also introduced something called Staying Connected, where we have regular vlogs from me and senior leaders, just to keep in touch, keep the communication strong.
Oh, that's great. Some good initiatives there. And Thomas, what have you done?
Similar things to Dalton. So management training, particularly about how to look after the well-being of teams. Kind of creating like all staff meetings where people are separated out into small Zoom groups to chat about stuff of whatever they want to choose, kind of weekly catch-ups within every team that are not work focused. We also had an additional day's leave for people because we knew that so many people had done extraordinary amounts of overtime, and then really fast feedback loops about the impact of our work in regular staff updates and trustee updates and to volunteer updates. So as nearly as real time as we were seeing the positive impact of our work and people being lifted out of financial hardship, feeding that back to the team, because that's the purpose of why we come to work.
Yeah, so some great insights there. I'm afraid we are out of time. It's been an absolutely fascinating discussion with you both. Thank you so much for joining us. And if you've enjoyed listening to this broadcast, please consider joining CMI. You can find how to do so in the chat. So Dalton and Thomas, thank you so much. And thanks everybody for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.